Okay, let me. All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 7 of the course, a little more than halfway through. Today, we'll be talking about auto layout and plugins. And then just a quick check-in. How are people doing with midterms, college, this class? Just like a thumb ranking. Oh, no. Are people almost done with midterms or like it's never ending? Okay, well, hopefully it gets better soon. So our midterm project is due tonight, but as we mentioned before, you do have a slip day that you can use for either the midterm or the final. We apply it automatically, so you don't have to message us or your TA or anything like that. But if you feel like you might need longer than tomorrow night, just message your TA and you can work something out. So here's what we're covering today. Of course, we're going to talk about auto layout. Not gonna lie, this is probably one of the trickiest concepts in the course, but hopefully we'll break it down step by step and you'll feel a little more comfortable by the end. And then for design theory part of today, we're going to talk about content-driven design using plain language and some Figma plugins, which will be helpful for projects later on. Cool, here's attendance. I think the secret word is Taco Tuesday. Doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2 words, but take a second and do that. And then if you want access to the slide deck, I highly recommend making a copy instead of using the actual, like the main deck for the demo, so you can try it out yourself. Okay, cool. And then let me know if you need the link later on. All right, so let's dive into auto layout. And the little subtext is design dynamic frames that respond to content. So you're probably wondering, what is auto layout? You can kind of tell from the name, but it basically lets you create dynamic frames that respond to their content. So far you've been probably raw dogging Figma. Anytime you need to make changes to the same component or thing you're working on, you might just resize everything automatically. But as you take on bigger and bigger design projects, especially with more complex like use and edge cases, it's kind of a real pain in the ass to adjust everything manually every single time. And especially like when you're designing in the real world or like quote unquote real world, and you don't know what like paths your users will take, it's really helpful to use auto layout. And then what it actually means in Figma is it's a property you can add to your frames and components. And this will let you create designs that will grow to fill or shrink to fit and reflow as their contents change. So here's some more examples. So in the first one, you can see that with auto layout, you can make buttons that automatically resize depending on how long your text is. So you don't have to like resize the background of the button at the same time. In the middle, we can also use auto layout to make menus and lists that can easily be reordered. So if you don't use auto layouts, you're probably going to be dragging stuff and then dragging everything to fit around it. But with auto layout, it's pretty much drag and drop, which is really nice. And you can see they're even resizing the frame it's in. And then lastly, it looks like someone's prototyping like a social media feed of some sort. But if you're designing, especially for digital interfaces, oftentimes your designs will be used across like web, mobile, tablet, desktop, and so on. So you can also create not just responsive elements of your design, but even responsive pages. So it's very, very useful. Even though it's a little tricky and takes some getting used to, it's super helpful. Okay, so getting started with auto layout. You can add auto layout to any frame or selection of objects. So this includes components, groups, and so on. And there's 3 ways you can do it. First, if you go on the right-hand panel, you first have to select which thing you want to add auto layout to, and you'll see a plus button next to the auto layout label, and it'll automatically add it. If you're a shortcuts person, you can also select everything and use Shift plus A. or you can right click and select add auto layout in your drop down list. All right, auto layout properties. Let's really get into it, and we're going to break it down like everything you can do with this super cool tool. So first is direction. Direction describes the way the auto layout frame will flow. So you can either do vertically or horizontally. Vertical, as you can imagine, will add, remove, or reorder objects along the y-axis. So for example, if you have objects in a list, that's vertical, or maybe you want to prototype like an Instagram feed, each post with all of its stuff would be like vertical since you scroll up and down. You can also do horizontal, which is along the x-axis. So for example, if you're prototyping like a button, maybe a button with an icon, the icon and the button label would be next to each other and thus horizontal. And then similar to components, you can also build designs that support both directions. You'll just need to nest your auto layout frames. So similar to how you can have like components within components, you can also have auto layout within auto layout. It can get like tricky real fast. Next, we have spacing. So auto layout is awesome because it automatically, when you apply it to whatever object you're adding it to, it automatically makes the spacing between all of your objects even. So these symbols show that like where you're adding horizontal and vertical space. So you can do it on the right-hand panel by adjusting these numbers manually, or you can use your cursor and kind of do what this demo is doing and like eyeball it. Next, we have padding. So padding controls the empty space between the objects and the boundary of an auto layout frame. So a similar analogy is that when you go to a museum, you see photos that are like, it might be in a frame, but between the actual like image or painting and the frame, there's like that white border. That's kind of what padding is in this context. So in Figma, you can set padding uniformly, vertically, no, sorry, like on the sides or top and bottom, or if you want to have different padding, you can also adjust those too, as you can see in the GIF. And then also if you want to set unique padding for each side, you'll click this like box without the corners looking thing, and then it'll show you the like individual sides. All right, alignment. So when you add auto layouts to objects, it will automatically be in its own frame. So these three item things are the objects and this white box is the frame. I highly recommend when you're starting out with auto layout to make your frame some nasty color, like maybe a hot pink or yellow or something, just so you can see what it's, just so you make sure like the alignment's right, but we'll get to that in the demo. Anyways, for alignment, Figma has a little interactive grid, which kind of gives you a preview of what it's supposed to look like. And then you can click around, but the default will be like, everything will stick to the top left corner. All right, so Figma has a few cool updates from this year from Config, their design conference. So traditionally, the old Figma had just this down arrow and this vertical and horizontal arrow, which shows like how your stuff is aligned. So for example, if you have a bunch of buttons you want to align, you could either only do like vertically or horizontally. But what happens if you want to add stuff in multiple rows? Well, before wrap, you'd have to manually make multiple rows and like resize it yourself, which is kind of painful. But with wrap, if you want to like adjust to your container, it would automatically adjust with it. So instead of having like multiple rows you make, auto layout would just move it to the next row. Okay, next we have distribution. So this is kind of similar to padding, but it's describing how the objects are spread or packed within the frame itself. So it's kind of a bigger level than just the elements. So you can have either packed, where everything is quite literally packed. They also have these fun little animations that show you what that looks like, or you can add space between, which is what's usually preferred. And then for this to work how you intended to, it's a good idea to check your individual elements, because if your individual elements have padding, then you might not need to add like extra space in your distribution, if that makes sense. All right, resizing. The term's a little tricky, but bear with me here. So resizing determines how the parent auto layout frames adapt to changes to their child objects. And similar to everything else, it can be applied both horizontal and vertically. So first we have hug content. So this means the frame basically hugs or surrounds your objects you have. So if you add more space to your objects, the frame will also expand to fit it. Alternatively, we have fixed width or height. So for example, if you're prototyping on a specific device like an iPhone or a MacBook, having a fixed width or height is useful, or fixed width is useful because you don't want it to expand like forever and ever. And then lastly, we have fill container, which is when the child objects stretch the width and or height of their parent frame. All right, next we have constraints. So constraints determine the behavior of a child object in relation to their parent frame. So it's kind of, instead of having it like everywhere, constraints, you can think of it as a way for it to like stick to a certain part of your frame. So in this GIF, you see that someone's prototyping a website. So every website has some sort of navigation bar at the top and a footer at the bottom. So the way this person's using constraints is that they're setting it so that if you resize it, the navigation bar will always like stick to the top of the frame, and then the footer will always stick to the bottom, just so you don't have to keep moving it around if your page gets longer or shorter. And then these are the specific settings. It's a lot of trial and error. Okay, this is also new from Figma this past year. Figma now has min and max constraints. So for example, if you're prototyping like this little dog card, but you don't want it to get too small, you can add minimum constraints. So when you add these min and max constraints, you see that these red lines show like the range of like sizes this frame can be, if that makes sense. Okay, and then here is showing nested auto layout. So in this class, you'll learn auto layout at a pretty basic level and use it to whatever extent you want to in projects. But if you were to work as a designer professionally, oftentimes your work will be like everything is fully auto layouted. So if you're designing from scratch, I highly recommend you start from like the smallest level and work your way up instead of taking an existing page and like trying to like add auto layouts. So here, this person made this like little architecture card, and they're adding these times to it. So let's see, pop up. Yeah, so these, you can see that there's auto layout before, and they're just dragging and dropping it into the bigger frame. Okay, so here is a more detailed example of nesting auto layout. So pretend this is like an Instagram or Twitter feed of some sorts. So first, at the smallest level, we have our button. Each button is a horizontal auto layout, and this allows the button to like shrink or grow depending on the text we put in. Then the next level up, we have button row. So we have a row of buttons. So of course, each button individually has auto layout, but then this row also has auto layout, and you can control like the spacing in between or where it is within this frame or like a post. Then at the next level above, we have posts. So we here we have posts where we add like auto layout to each of these boxes individually. And then lastly, at the highest level, we have our news feed, which shows like how these posts are laid out in relation to each other. So you can see how each step of the way has auto layout, and if you start from the bottom, it gets easier as you go up. Okay, that was a lot of content. I'm going to go through a demo where I basically walk through everything I talked about, but does anyone have any questions about auto layout conceptually or any of the terms? Also happy to go back to any of the slides. Okay, sweet. Let's go to the demo. So going back to slides, if you want to try out the demo, I strongly recommend copying the slide deck link and making your own version of the file. Okay, so I'm on the demo tab. We're going to do a few examples starting from a simple button, then all the way to a feed, and we'll see how much we can cover. So first, we're going to make a button using auto layout, and this is the button we'll be making. So grab some text. I'm using this. If you want to use the same one, it's enter, semi-bold, and then size 32, but the font doesn't really matter. Just pick something you like. And then I'm just going to make this, I'm also just going to call this button. Okay, so to add auto layout to this, I can do Shift A. If you're trying to, you can do Shift A, or you can right click and it'll be add auto layout. So I'm going to do that. And now it'll say auto layout added and this frame. So right now it's in a frame, but it doesn't look like anything because it's clear. So I'm going to add a fill. I'm going to make it some really horrendous color, like this red. All right, and then just note, if you want to make changes to the frame, make sure you click on the frame and not the text. The text will manipulate the actual text, but we don't want to do that. So here's our button. Here, these are the, it gives like these default paddings. I'm going to add some padding on the sides. So instead of 10, maybe try 30. And for height, maybe like 15. And if you click on it and hover, you'll see like visually the padding it looks like. I'm going to make this button the same style as the button here. So I'm going to add a stroke, maybe like 3 or 2. And I'm also going to round the corners. So it's like very round. I want to add some more padding. So maybe I'll do like 50. Cool. So now if I were to move things in my grid, because it's just this one tiny frame, it's not going to look like anything. So let's move on to making a row of buttons. Is everyone with me so far on our singular button? Okay, sweet. So I'm going to make a few copies of this. So when I copy paste, yeah, so it's going to default to like 10 pixels or something. But if you want to adjust the spacing between your buttons, you can also do that, do it manually or use the thing. So right now, because these are 3 separate frames, they have no relation to each other. So what I'm going to do is add auto layout to the buttons again. So I'm going to Shift A. So it makes 1 frame. And then just so we see the background change, I'm going to make it like this horrendous red color again. Cool. So now we have 3 buttons, each with their own auto layout, and they're also in a frame. So now these buttons have some relation to each other, and we can manipulate the frame. So I'm going to add, maybe make this like an even number. And I'm going to add some padding horizontally and vertically. So let's say like 20. So right now in my frame, it's going to default to horizontal or vertical, whatever option you set it at last. Let's say I don't want these buttons in a row, I want in a column. So if I want to do that, I would just click this down arrow and you can see, you can like switch between it easily. If you want to make multiple rows of buttons without making 2 rows, you can also use wrap and you'll see. Yeah, there we go. So if you use wrap, it'll automatically resize it for you, which is sweet. but let's just do this for now. So right now, everything, I think it will default to hug if you don't do anything with it. So what this means is that, let's say add a bunch of padding between these. What hug does is it basically hugs everything on the outside. But if you want to change that, you can also do fixed width. So this means if you expand the frame, the buttons will basically stay where they are. And then if you do fixed height, let's see. Yeah, it'll just stay like that. Okay, let's say my frame looks like this now. So this is where the grid comes in handy if you have something more complex. So it'll default to the top left, but you can also move it to the right. You can align it center, do all sorts of things. And if you want to adjust the padding, you can do so here and play around with it. All right, so this is kind of like a fake example. So if you want to use some more tags, I'm gonna just select these all, hit Shift A, and then you'll see it automatically adds that spacing. I'm gonna do wrap, so you can see. And then because wrap, you have extra rows, you'll see this extra property pop up. So you can adjust the spacing between the rows too. And that is really fun. Okay, how are people feeling about buttons and rows so far? Maybe just like a quick thumbs. Sweet. Okay, let's do something a little more realistic. So I'm gonna make this corgi card. So these are my elements. Just make sure it's in like the rough order you want it. I'm gonna select everything and hit Shift A. So here you can see it automatically adds this padding here. I'm gonna add fill, make it some color. So now I have my frame. I'm gonna add some padding to it. So let's do like maybe like 50 for both. And then this corgi is like really far in the middle. So I want to tighten the spacing between the items. So maybe it's like 50. Okay, so now we have this frame. Let's say I want to adjust this to like, maybe this is on my phone. I want to adjust it to tablet. But if I expand this frame, none of the stuff moves with it. So what I'm going to do is think about the elements one by one and think about what I want to happen to it. So if I were to expand the frame, I want this picture to expand with it and kind of fill in this top space. So what I'm going to do, if I click on this picture, I see it's fixed. Let me try fill container. So if I click on it, it's fill, which means that if I resize this frame, this dog will resize with it. But the text is not moving too. So I'm going to do the same with this text. Not fill. This one. Let's see what the setting here is. Oh man, why is it doing that? Fill. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening, but this is what it should look like in the end. That's how you make a card. Okay, let's say you want to make a social media feed for your favorite dogs. So I'm just gonna I just like copy pasted the card and change the individual elements. So here you'd basically do the same thing. Shift A. Maybe you want to add some background. Let's do like a fun teal blue. Maybe just the spacing. I'm just gonna do it manually this time. and then I want everything to be hugged. So here you can see if I do wrapped, it will automatically move everything, which is sweet. You can also just do it horizontally or vertically. So if you're prototyping something more complex, you just basically, you can see how I'm doing like basically the same thing, but at different levels. But that's basically it. Any other questions or anything that I should go over again before we move on? Okay, sweet. I'll hand it off to Claire for the rest of the lecture.
Hello. Okay, so we finished the auto layout section, so now we have some more like theory-based content. Now we're gonna go over content-driven design. So what is content-driven design? It's basically design that focuses on the actual content throughout the design process to inform and guide decisions. So the content may include a variety of media from text, photos, videos, charts, tables, lists, and more. And it's all about knowing more about what your design's purpose is and how it will achieve that purpose before you even start like approaching your design process. So why is that important? So if you imagine that you're building a house, using placeholder content is like telling the architect to like just build the framework and then we'll figure out the inside details later. So how can you get like a decent structure without knowing like what you want inside first? So it's basically like trying to plan ahead to make sure that everything works well, instead of just like approaching it without knowing it, what you want to get out of it. So yeah. Okay, so design should mold to the content and not the other way around. So oftentimes, designers can clip lorem ipsum to exactly what fits into their designs, but with your real content that you're actually going to fill in, you can't just really like pick and choose what fits your layout. So basing your designs on the content instead of just handling edge cases after the fact makes you think a little bit harder about designing with your sizing, restriction, and also use cases. So by prioritizing these things early on in the design process, you can avoid like a lot of repetitive editing or like little finicky details that may be hard to work out later on. So here is a bad example. So if you see the very top, like I'm assuming those are like story icons, this design only accounts for like shorter Anglo-Saxon names, such as like James, Mark, Christian. And so if you have someone with a longer name, it wouldn't be able to fit into the space that they laid out there. And the graphs and charts are kind of ambiguous. Like, yes, you know it's data, but like what kind of data is it representing? It's really unclear. And also the placeholder gradient images give no indication of how the app would actually function. So like there's no like, you can't really guess like how the interaction would work. So how does content-driven design work? So good content is based on your users and their motivations. So understanding your users' needs is crucial, and it's vital to understand that the journey that they go through. So to achieve this, there's several UX research tools that can help you understand and build better content-driven designs. So when you're starting a project, you should consider the following questions. What are you trying to communicate to your audience? What has the user seen before they get to your content? And what is the user looking for? So how can your design help them efficiently find what they need? Okay, so this is the first method of that we're going to introduce today. It's going to be card sorting. So this is when you give your participants a deck of cards, and all of them are each going to have a word or image, and then your participants are going to rank them according to a question or criteria that makes sense to them. And this also helps you inform an information architecture that aligns with users' expectations and values. So here on the bottom image, we see a bunch of cards that the participant would sort, and then after on the right, you see that they sorted them into subsections. So which cards would, in their head, like go under each larger section. Okay, the second method is going to be journey mapping. And this is when you're going to visualize the major interactions shaping a user's experience to accomplish a goal. So basically, we're trying to find out like what exactly are they going to do, and how does that make up their experience, and how do they find what they're looking for. So on the bottom, we see a customer journey map for a person named Jamie, who wants to switch mobile plans. So this one is divided into 4 main sections where they define their current plan, first of all, and then they compare the plan, and then they negotiate, and then they select. So usually you'll see like this little path with like little either quotations and then like steps that are numbered out to see what their process is like. Okay, and the third one is going to be information architecture. This helps you create a visual representation of the product's infrastructure, features, and hierarchy. And this also helps you plan and organize the content of a new website or app prior to wireframing and building it. So this is basically just like laying out what the flow process would be. So if we see here, it's like a really large chart to see like what each page or action would lead you to go to. So this like is really helpful to help you lay out like what screens you may need to build for your website or whatever you're designing. Okay, are there any questions? Okay. All right, so now we're gonna go over plain language. Since we are aiming for accessible design, this also includes accessible content. So plain language is communication that your audience can understand the first time they read or hear it. So basically, the Plain Language Initiative grew out of a government group promoting the use of plain language in government communications to the public. These guidelines are universally applicable, far beyond like just the government use context. So basically, to make design accessible, you can't just consider like visual elements like color or like how large your font is. The content itself has to be like also accessible to anyone and everyone. So plain language is often overlooked, but it's really essential to making sure there's accessible content and designs on any medium. So the plain language checklist, here are some highlights from the website that they have. If you're interested, there's like a larger list. So content in plain language is going to have useful headings. It's going to be organized to serve the reader's needs. It uses you and other pronouns to speak to the reader. It uses short section and short sentences. It omits excess words, uses concrete, familiar words, and then it also uses lists and tables to simplify complex material. So on the left, we see like a chart comparing like a good examples and bad examples. So basically, in summary, you're making sure like the language that you use is easy to understand to readers of like any level of understanding of the language. Making sure it's concise. There's not like a bunch of extra verbiage in there that you don't need. Yeah. Okay, so plain language on the web. So on the web, people are more prone to skimming something to find quick answers. So never use like click here as a link. Language should describe what your reader will get to if they click the link. You should also make liberal use of white space so pages are easy to scan. So when stuff is really close together, it's hard to find like a smaller section of what you need. You should write using the same words that your readers would use when doing a web search for the info. And don't assume your readers have knowledge of the subject or have read related pages on your website. So you should be able to clearly explain each thing on your website so that each page can stand on its own. So as you see on the left over there, there's like really large chunks of text. You can't really scan it to read the information. You need to read the whole paragraph. And it's also hard to read because it's a whole chunky paragraph. On the right, you see it's like a chart. Way less words, like significantly less words. Everything's like well defined that you can see exactly what you need and really easy to skim. Okay, does anyone have questions about plain language? Okay. All right, so this section I really like Figma plugins. So sometimes you might want to do stuff in Figma that isn't already built into the system itself. So we can sort of supplement that area with Figma plugins. So what is a plugin? plugins are basically like little power-ups, and they help you extend Figma's product functionality. So they can help with things like automating repetitive tasks, filling in real content, checking accessibility standards, and so much more. So plugins are built by other Figma community members and published on Figma's community page. And you can even make your own plugins if you're interested from scratch. So here are some examples of utility plugins. These are used to organize your workspace and can also speed up your workflow. So some examples include, better font picker. So Figma used to have this thing where you can't preview a font when you're selecting the font, which was a little silly of them. But then a lot of people use this plugin to help you like preview the font before you select it, but now they changed it, so it's probably way less used now. Rename it, where you can batch rename layers and frames. I think they also changed this. You can like search and replace now in Figma. Find and replace, search for text, and then clean document, semi-layer, red lines. Yeah, there's a lot of fun ones if you go on Figma community and explore. Accessibility plugins. So these are really helpful to make sure that you're following accessibility guidelines to make sure that all your designs are going to be inclusive. So some examples include Able, which helps you check color contrast ratios. Focus order, you annotate and test designs for keyboard and screen reader users. Colorblind, to make sure that your design accommodates for people who are colorblind. Viewports, where you can preview designs on a variety of device sizes to ensure that they're all responsive. Okay, some content plugins. These help you quickly populate your designs with real content. So content could include anything from names and phone numbers to profile pictures and graphs. So some examples include Google's Sheet Sync. So if you want to sync data from like a Google Sheet to elements in your design, this is really helpful. You can use the plugin. It will automatically import all the text for you, so you don't have to type it out or like Control-C, Command-Z. Yeah. And then content reel, you can quickly insert text-based content into your designs. Mapsicle, where you can add Mapbox map images right into your design. Chart, where you use real or random data to create customizable charts. Blush, which is going to be a collection of free illustrations. And then Unsplash, which is stock images that you can use without like all the watermarking all over them. Okay, so some more plugins. Some exciting ones. You can use a timer. There's one where you can make blobs. One that helps you create animations in Figma. Pattern Hero, which helps you create your own patterns. And Figma Tetris. You can also play Tetris in Figma. Very exciting. Okay, so if you want to run a plugin, if you go to your top toolbar, the third one in from the right, there should be a resources icon. You're going to click on plugins. Once you open that icon, it should be the second one on the top bar. And then you're going to search for the plugin you want. You can look up anything. You can be like icons, and then it'll give you a list of plugins that help you run icons, or you can like search for a specific function that you're interested in. Or if you want to browse them, you can also just go on Figma community. But yeah, I find it easier to just go through this way to find your plugins, because then you're already in your file that you need to apply it to. Yeah, so each plugin is going to have a different interface because they're all self-published by people on Figma community. So you are going to have to figure out how each one works by itself, but usually they should be pretty easy to navigate. So a few things to keep in mind about plugins. You need to run them manually. So you need to go to this section and then select it to make sure it pops up, and then you can run it. And when they're active, you can't perform actions in the background. Okay, yeah, so FigJam plugins and widgets. FigJam also allows you to use plugins and also widgets, which are mostly like tools or toys, sorry, that you can add to your FigJam files, and you can check a community to see which ones work for which one. Some of them are for one or the other, and some of them are also for both. Okay, so wrapping up, here are your announcements and also your assignments. So this week, since you guys, your midterm is due today, technically, you have homework 7, which is going to be an auto layout menu. And you're going to use the skills you learned today to create a menu using auto layout components for a restaurant or like some sort of cafe menu. And also we understand that this is kind of like a tricky week. So if you have any questions at all, please come to office hours, or if you're more comfortable asking your TA, that is also a great option. And then your lab is going to be and auto layout flex froggy. This is actually my favorite lab, so I hope you guys like it. Yeah, you get to move frogs around the frame. Very exciting. Also, the background is such a nice green color. I love it. Okay. Yeah, so that is basically it. There's also reading as usual. And as a reminder, your midterm is due today by midnight. If you need anything, so like questions, or if you need more time on it, please reach out to me or Dia or your TA. Yeah, thank you so much.